Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. We're going to start things off with Rascally Roy himself, the legend, Roy Thomas. Really excited about this conversation. I've been wanting to do it really since the start of Word Balloon. And Roy's such a busy guy working on Alter Ego magazine and a lot of other things that he's been writing. We talk a bit about that in the conversation. And in the past, I've emailed him, and he's like, well, I can give you, maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And my thought was, I can't. It's Roy Thomas. My God. The guy's been writing comics for decades. He's covered every character in the Marvel Universe and a good number of the DC Universe characters as well. I can't do it. So I would turn him down and be like, no, not enough time. And I talked to him, and we arranged this conversation. We were only going to talk for a half hour, and thankfully I think Roy got going and maybe enjoyed the conversation enough that we were able to continue talking for a good hour. And really excited to give it to you today. It's kind of my greatest hits requests. I mean, there's not a lot of Conan talk. There's not a lot of Avengers talk. There's a little bit in there. But I really was interested in Roy's World War II comics. Things like the Invaders and the All-Star Squadron. They're among my favorite Roy Thomas books. So I really wanted to focus on that. But of course, within the conversation, we couldn't help but mention his role in the development of Wolverine. And a lot of other great subjects. Conan does come up, the Avengers. We talk a little bit about the current Marvel movies. So it's a great conversation with Roy. And certainly we talk about Alter Ego, his magazine that he's been editing since its inception. And he and his staff are continuing to bring the Silver and Golden Age alive with great interviews with living creators and their children in some cases. And man, I'm excited for some of the stuff that's coming up in Alter Ego. I think you're going to enjoy it. It's brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you, League, for your support, subscribing through Patreon, and also just anecdotally sending me emails and tweet messages and saying how much you like the show through Facebook as well. It really means a lot, and I appreciate that you appreciate what I'm trying to do here. Just trying to bring you the best conversation in comics I can possibly do. And, again, today I think is a great example of that. If you like what you hear at Word Balloon and think it helps you enrich your love of the comic book world and the geek culture world, and you want to help me out, if you want to help by subscribing via Patreon, that's great. Word Balloon is free. It'll always be free. But if you can help the cause out, is it worth $1 a month? Is it worth $3, the price of a comic book a month? Again, I think I give you hours of enjoyment here at Word Balloon, and if you want to help the cause out, you can help by subscribing to Word Balloon via Patreon. Go to patreon.com/wordballoon, or you can click on the front page Patreon ad at wordballoon.com. But thank you very much for your continued support, League of Word Balloon listeners. All right, without further ado, let's get into our conversation now with Roy Thomas, Rascally Roy himself, on Word Balloon. Roy Thomas, welcome to Word Balloon. It's a pleasure to have you on, sir.
Great. Well, I'm happy to be here, wherever here is.
Well, I'm in Chicago, but we do pretty good.
Okay,
we're a worldwide audience, so
we're together in cyberspace,
Exactly. Well,
which looks a little like I guess where the Ant-Man and the Wasp were in that recent movie.
I haven't had a chance. I'm embarrassed to say I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. Have you seen it?
Yeah, it's all right. Although I don't know how we knew 2 Ant-Men and 2 Wasps, but other than that, it's a nice visual treat.
Well, as someone who's written big Avenger epics, I should ask you what you thought of Infinity War.
Well, it's a big visual epic. I've never been as big on the super cosmic thing that Jim Starlin, who's certainly a friend and a very talented guy, has always been into with his Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity War, etc. That was never. I did a couple of those, the Kree-Skrull War and so forth, but I was never as big on the cosmic war kind of scale. So in some ways, that wasn't my kind of movie. But I have to say, it definitely looks like a Marvel comic, not just a Starlin comic, but a big giant crossover with a lot of stuff happening. And so in many ways, it was perhaps the almost the closest equivalent so far to an actual classic Marvel comic, at least one of a few decades ago during the classic period.
I would agree.
And so that's kind of good. I'm looking forward to seeing the second part, and of course, my main concern is that they bring the Vision back to life. That's about all I I really care. They can kill off anybody else, but just keep the Vision around.
I hear you, man. No, and I really appreciated. In fact, your story of the Vision when they collected it in the Treasury edition was literally one of the first Avenger stories I ever read. And
which one? You mean the very first one?
Yeah,
Avengers 57. Yeah.
Well, and of course, even a Vision can cry, or even an android could cry.
Yeah, that was the next issue. Yeah, it was really a sort of a two-part story in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that was amazing. And yeah, I mean, again, they put it in one of those giant-sized Treasury editions. That's the first time I read it. So that was my first exposure to the Vision and Yellow Jacket and Black Panther and all these characters that maybe Marvel fans take for granted. And it was very exciting for this 9-year-old when I read it.
Well, they all had to start. They all had to start somewhere. I mean, there was a day when I first walked into a store and saw Superman or Batman for the first time as a kid, or the Flash as a teenager, or Fantastic Four #1 as a just graduated college student. I mean, there's always a first for something, whether it's the original comic or whether it's a reprint, 5 years later or a half a century later. So every comic that comes out, somebody's seeing it for the first time.
Well, I know next month at Terrificon, you're doing a panel with Jim Starlin to talk about Marvel Cosmic, and you'll be talking about the Kree Skull War, and I have the pleasure of moderating that panel, so I'm excited to do that.
Oh, you do? Well, okay.
But for
we'll hopefully show up and and everything. Yeah, I saw at another convention. I guess it was the New Jersey convention. I as a matter of fact, Mitch Halleck had arranged for us all to go, but I had trouble appreciating it the first time I saw it because we were in the second row or something, and it was 3D, and I have an eye that's kind of, my right eye's kind of gone bad on me, so I really, I don't know, I don't get as much out of 3D, and especially not from the second row looking up, it's sort of all lost. So I had trouble just kind of watching the picture that night, because I had to go see it a second time in order to kind of appreciate it.
Oh, was that for Infinity War? Was that the plan?
Yeah, Infinity War, yeah.
Got it. Okay. Well,
when it first, come out, that was just like first or second day it had come out, yeah.
I understand. Well, with our limited time, I wanted to focus on one thing of yours that I loved, and I don't hear you talk about it enough, and that's the Invaders, because I was such a fan of your run on the Invaders, and even when you came back to it a couple times in the 90s and such. I'm really interested. Was it hard to convince Marvel to do a book that reflected on their golden age? I mean, did you have to be at a place of power to get that book greenlit? Can you tell us how
Well, it was really more that I was leaving a place of power. What happened is that I had just stepped down as the editor-in-chief in '74. I was just in the process of leaving that job. Stan and I had, really more because of other people than because of ourselves, had kind of come to an impasse where it just made more sense for me to leave the job than to stay. Stan was being caught in between me and the president of the company, who didn't like me because he felt I was too much on the side of the artists, the writers, and not always a company man and that kind of thing. Maybe he was right. So anyway, I was leaving, and when I was leaving, I needed to get myself some assignment because I was getting a contract in order to, one of the first contracts, maybe below the level of Stan that Marvel had given out, to write and be the editor of my own material, not subject to the new editor-in-chief, but only to Stan. And so I wanted a couple of new books, and I wanted to get them outside the Marvel mainstream, partly because I was, I'd written all those characters at one time or the other just about,
sure.
And partly because I didn't want to have to coordinate a lot of stuff with other writers and artists, I just felt like I just wanted my own little corner. I already had that to some extent with the very popular Conan books.
You bet.
There were two of those, and they were some of the big money makers at Marvel at the time. But I wanted to get one or two more titles that would be, outside that mainstream, no coordination, no reason to ask another writer or another editor, what I could do with the characters. So I figured if I did stories set in World War II, with Captain America, Human Torch, and Submariner, I wouldn't have to coordinate with anybody because, nobody could say, well, I'm using Captain America that month, so you can't use him, or I'm using this or that guy, because they weren't using him in 1941-42, which is when the book was set.
Sure.
And the other thing I did was I sort of assaulted the Earth there a little bit by Stan had this idea back about 68, right before all the characters got their own titles. You know, in the anthology, characters all got their own titles.
Mm-hmm.
He had this idea after the success of this one issue with the Hulk and Submariner fighting for the whole issue of Tales to Astonish. He'd had the idea for a while of teaming up the Hulk and the Submariner as a team and calling them the Invaders. And he quickly forgot about it, decided, it really wouldn't work, keep doing it month after month. But I remember that he liked that title. Of course, in between there had been this TV show, but that only lasted one season and nobody really remembered it that well. So when I told Stan this idea about, I said it's gonna have Captain America, one of the big characters, plus the Human Torch and Submariner, and we'll have other characters in, and it'll just be stories set in World War II, sort of like the ones he and Jack had done with Captain America a few years earlier.
Sure.
And I said, I've got a great title. I said, it's The Invaders. And Stan said, I like that name. Not remembering it was one that he had proposed for a series years earlier, and I didn't remind him. So, by the time I walked out of the room, I had a new bi-monthly, title to do, and that was the reason I did it. I was interested in World War II, and, I'd written Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos,
sure.
and I was very interested in the home front of World War II, and I was fascinated by comics history and the fact that the superheroes had all kind of started right before or during World War II. All the great superheroes, the Marvel ones, the DC ones, the Fawcett ones like Captain Marvel, and all the others, they almost all came to fruition during that period from the late 30s through the mid 40s. And so I thought, well, this would be their heyday in a way, and be a great excuse to write new adventures of them, such as should have been done by Timely back in the 40s, but they never really had those characters to get together much after the initial Torch Namor fights. They never really, they had 2 issues after the war with those characters together in the All-Winter Squad, but it was only when they were already, past their prime and beginning almost to die out.
Yeah.
And nobody saw them. I don't even know if as a kid I saw them, and I bought almost everything of that sort. But so I figured this way I could finally do that kind of book and have a lot of fun with it. And I wasn't under the assumption that it would be necessarily one of Marvel's, big sellers, but we did okay for a while with it.
Well, I'll tell you, it was literally one of my favorite books that you were putting out, and I absolutely love the idea of these backstories. I think because I grew up with those 100-page spectaculars where they were reprinting all the Justice Society stories in the JSA. And like you said, I was surprised that Timely never made that move, or even with the success in the 60s of the Justice League. And granted, we had the Avengers and everything, but with Gardner Fox, doing the crossovers and stuff with the JSA, that it never occurred to Stan and the Marvel team that they wouldn't mind that
or
stuff.
To DC. DC never did either until I got there in 1980.
Well, that's right, with All-Star Squadron. Yes,
I was a one-man cheerleader for World War II stories, I guess.
So you picked...
I can understand why. I mean, it was already several decades in the past, and American readers don't have a real great interest in history. But I figured, this was still the era where the great heroes, the Red Skull, and Adolf Hitler. I mean, what's not to like about that?
And also the great costume designs, both the Timely heroes and the DC heroes as well, the national heroes. Because, even Captain America knockoffs like the Patriot. When I saw him in your Liberty Legion stories, I'm like, oh, that's an interesting character. And well, first of all, I wanted to ask regarding the Invaders, working with Frank Robbins, and I was one of those kids that I have to say, at first I'm like, oh man, what an ugly style. But then it was compelling. Well, but as I've matured and read things like his great comic strip, Johnny Hazard, I'm like, oh, this guy's a genius. And I have a great regard now for his art, no matter what.
Yeah, but the problem is, the people who were deciding whether comic books lived or died were more like you as a kid than you as an adult. I was very happy in some ways to get him. He was somebody else's suggestion, but it made sense to me. He had just sort of come over, from working at DC, I guess, and I liked his work, what little I'd seen of it. And John Romita, the art director, was a big fan of his, because Romita was a big fan of Milt Caniff, so naturally he was a big fan of, and he really admired Robbins. The one thing that was a problem with Frank was great. He was a great storyteller. He was wonderful with the details of World War II because, of course, he had lived through, that era. And he would toss things in that, a younger artist wouldn't have thought of without me directing him. He would just toss a lot of stuff in, the nice touches, just wonderful. And the storytelling was great. But he had one problem, and that is that he had a drawing style based on a kind of his own particular version of Milt Caniff and the Luther style that somehow didn't really mesh with the kind of Kirby-inspired, storytelling which Marvel was doing. John Romita was an example of the absolute perfect blend, and had been since the 1950s when he did Captain America, of the Milt Caniff school with the Jack Kirby school. You look at that, and you can see equal parts of those two artists in the wonderful work he did back in the 50s, which is my favorite of his work. Frank admired Caniff, but to him, the Kirby-type stuff, that was just bad drawing, I think. And so when he would draw this stuff, the figures tended to look too rubbery or floating in the air and didn't have the, it didn't have the right feel somehow. What I did, which was both sacrilegious to some and at the same time successful, was to have it inked by Vinnie Coletta, who had been the inker of Thor, quite popular, and who had a lot of faults, including not always inking everything that was on the page, etc., and doing it at a rapid pace. But the readers really liked his work. He kind of noodled it up, and somehow he and Frank together, the book sold really well for that first 7 or so issues that he was inking it. Now, I won't say that it's necessarily because of this, but the very first issue, that about number 8 or 9, that Vinny left because he became an assistant art director or something at DC. The very first issue after he left, I had the very talented Frank Springer ink the book, and he made it look much, much more like real Frank Robbins, and the sales dropped. And never really recovered from that.
Wow.
We went along for a while and only got to 40 or 50 issues and could have gone on. I think if it hadn't been for Jim Shooter kind of, just being as happy to see books I had fail, I think that the book could have easily gone on. I think there were other things in play besides just sales figure, though it certainly wasn't a big seller. But in its later years when it was finally dropped, and I screwed up a little bit by not writing all the stuff myself. My friend Don Glute did a good job on some things, but I should have watched over it myself and not given out the writing to anybody else, except that I had just moved about that time to Los Angeles, and, it was a different life. I was doing a little bit of work in other fields and, dating again after my, divorce and everything. So, somehow comic books weren't really quite center, front, and foremost in my mind as they'd once did. So I was very happy to have somebody else write some stories, that I could just edit. And that, probably wasn't the best for the Invaders, despite the good work that Don did. So there were just a lot of different things. But it is funny, that book sold as long as, I don't know if it's magic or what, but as long as Vinny inked it, it sold. And as soon as Vinny left it, it stopped selling.
That's pretty cool. And I'm glad to hear, because I've certainly heard both sides of the argument about Vinnie Coletta. And it's part of, that's what makes comics fascinating. And he's certainly a character. And I have appreciated the anecdotes and hearing an advocate in terms of Vinny's style. Because, he is kind of notorious for
I like the
erasing.
style. He's the kind of guy who could have been a really good inker if he took a little more time. But that wasn't his style. His idea was, he was fairly good. I mean, Stan liked his style and had a personal relationship with Vinny to some extent. The readers liked his style. His Thor inking was quite popular. There wasn't any rank and hue and cry from the readers against Vinnie Coletta. That was all either in the professionals themselves or maybe a few older readers who noticed that the Kirby stuff maybe looked like it had been simplified a little bit. But the fact remains, from the point of view of just seeing what came out on the page, his Thor stuff holds up very well. No, it's not Fantastic Four inked by Joe Sinnott, but it beats the hell to me out of Fantastic Four inked by 2 or 3 other people that had inked the book in the past.
Understood. And also, I always felt he drew beautiful women or inked beautiful women, and
that was his specialty. He was a romance artist, and he could actually draw when he wanted to. He just preferred to wheel and deal rather than actually work. He had his other things. He had his photographer studio with all the nude models, a few blocks away from Marvel, where he would invite me or whoever happened to be the editor-in-chief of the week, and stuff like that. And, he preferred not to get by on talent, even though I think he had plenty of it.
Interesting. Very interesting. Your what if story, which I thought was such a marvelous solution to what does the Marvel Universe do when Captain America goes missing, and what the United States does. And I'll tell you, I love that story, and I'm so happy that it's been kind of shoehorned into continuity now. I think Brubaker and
I had mentioned at the time that even though this was a comic called What If, that this actually was a story in continuity. I've been pleased to see that it's been kind of left that way.
Absolutely.
It was intended from the get-go that even though this was a breach of the format of the book or its purpose, that it was still one I wanted to do. Since I was the editor and Stan didn't say no because I didn't ask him, it just got by the way it was. What happened is that when I'd been the editor, I had assigned Steve Englehart and asked him to take care of this matter with what happened to the Captain America that after 1945 when there were still adventures from 45 to 49 and plus the return in the 50s.
Yes. And
Steve did a wonderful storyline there and everything except for one thing. Everything he did was fine, but he didn't really take care of the whole period. He didn't handle. He sort of had that 50s Captain America like he went crazy or something like this. Right. I forget all the details. Yeah. But anyway, he didn't take care of that whole period of who had been, of who had been the Captain America in the 40s, and then did he come back in the 50s? Was it somebody else or whatever it was? So I decided that since he had done a fine story, but it didn't cover all the bases I wanted, I would just take care of the rest of it myself in that one What If, and have a kind of a fun story itself. Since there had been 2 issues of All Winners Squad with number 19 and 21, I kind of acted like this, in a sense, was the missing All Winners number 20.
It was great, man.
Although I guess actually it took place maybe before, I forget. But anyway,
I know what you mean.
I forget all these details after all these years. It's been what, 40 years or so since and more since the Invaders.
That's true, and the what ifs as well. Man, great what if stories. And also, did you write that second one as well, where Bucky lived and Bucky took over the mantle and Steve became, kind of the
I think that was
Shield?
Sort of my idea. I think I didn't write it. That might have been why I gave Don or something to write.
Okay,
I had a number of I was going to write every issue myself, but I got kind of disgusted because without telling me, they back at the office, and for no particular reason, I wasn't late or behind or anything. They stuck in what is probably a good issue, issue number 3 that they had Jim Shooter write about the Avengers and everything. But I was annoyed because, they just stuck it in without telling me in a book that I had created. And so I decided, the hell with them. So after that, I just didn't bother writing every issue, and I decided to, and within about a year, I got off it and just let other people take it over. I had thought I wanted to write every issue, but then I decided, once I saw one issue come out that I didn't do, it made me think, well, if I didn't do that issue, I don't care if I do the rest of them either. So wow. I just did the ones I liked after that. I did the Invaders. I did the Conan one.
Yes, which is fantastic. Conan in the Modern World.
I kind of wish I had done myself. Again, Don Glut did a fine job. I wish I had done that one about the 1950s Avengers myself. That was an idea of mine, and I would have done it just a little differently, but Don did a good job with it. But it's one that having been a kid myself in the 50s too, as Don was, I think I would have had I would have, had a different take on it and so forth. But that's, it turned out okay. And the book had a lot of good moments, and they keep bringing it back. So it was kind of a nice, that was another idea like the Invaders that I made up at the time of leaving in order to give myself a book where I didn't have to check with anybody else. Because if I'm doing a what if story, again, nobody can say I need to check with a Spider-Man writer or the Fantastic Four editor to use the characters, because this is a what if story anyway. So it was just an attempt of mine to avoid the whole problem of continuity.
Well,
even though, of course, I'm the continuity kid, but I wanted to avoid it with. But I just didn't want to have to. I liked the other editors, Marv Wolfman, Len Wein, Jerry Conway. They're all Archie Goodwin, all friends of mine. But I just didn't want to have to deal with them or with the other writers. I wanted to, especially after I got to California, I just wanted to go off in my own corner and write, and the heck with them all,
Well, sure, and I know that I in another conversation, I'd love to hear more about. Your complicated.
If you need a little more time, I mentioned the half hour just in case we needed to, but if you need another 15, 20 minutes, we can talk.
Man.
I don't want to. Yeah,
I appreciate that.
I felt bad making it short and and everything.
And truly, Roy, I appreciate you saying that, and also I know that again, I know how busy you are, so I do appreciate that. Well, we'll keep going now. I also wondered if What If obviously was inspired by those great '60s imaginary stories that DC was doing as well.
To some extent, they were. Of course, my first job, was as the assistant editor to Mort Weisinger on Superman. At the time they were doing those stories.
Sure.
I sort of always, I liked the idea and some of the stories. I mean, I didn't read Superman regularly, but I sort of liked the idea. But the idea of an imaginary story is sort of to say, it didn't happen. And since I did like the idea of parallel worlds, Stan didn't particularly, but I did. So I figured, well, if I have the Watcher introduce these stories and say they're happening like on parallel worlds, it made them not imaginary stories. They were stories of an alternative world. And I'd already, done that with the Squadron Sinister and Squadron Supreme in Avengers.
Sure.
So I'd already kind of introduced that into Marvel's version of Earth 2 at the time, I suppose. And so I just carried it on in this particular case.
And I loved in that first issue of What If, when Spider-Man joins the Fantastic Four, when the Watcher, and you just have glimpses of, on this world, Killraven, this is happening, and on various other worlds, and certainly the Squadron Supreme was one of those.
There was even
worlds.
a hint of the Superman Spider-Man story, even though you couldn't show Superman, just his fist.
I forgot about that.
Or maybe you missed that.
That's excellent. No, I got to go back and look at that. That's fantastic.
Oh yeah, there's a fist hitting the air around Spider-Man, which is taken from the, that first tabloid and everything, and. I couldn't mention Superman's name, so I had to be kind of coy about it. But yeah, I wanted to mention all these because obviously, I had made up the concept for the War of the Worlds series, even though I never ended up writing it. And again, I felt like this is another parallel Earth version of of the world. So this was a good way to just be able to do anything we wanted to. Starting with the idea of what if in that famous little incident, in in Spider-Man?
Yes.
What if Spider-Man really had joined the Fantastic Four, and then what if this happened? What if that happened? And except for that Invaders story, they were all parallel world stories. That the only one that wasn't, I guess, was What If number 4.
And that would be the Captain America.
The Invaders,
yeah. The Invaders
if I've got the number right.
I think you're right. No, they're great, and I'm glad you mentioned that you conceived Killraven, because I appreciated a lot of that '70s output from Marvel, where clearly you were tapping pulps and concepts beyond traditional superheroes and bringing back old ideas, but kind of modernizing them for the comic book world, and certainly Iron Fist fits in that world as well. I was a big Lost Horizon fan, and I certainly recognized the.
Yeah, I've never read the book. I saw the movie.
Sure, me too, man.
and of course, we were actually taking it not directly even from Lost Horizon, movie or book, but from the comic book version that Bill Everett had swiped of it in 1939, the Amazing Man character, which Gil Kane was a big fan of. So when I told him about this character I wanted to do called Iron Fist and so forth, he immediately came up with this idea. Let's swipe a lot of stuff, from the Amazing Man book I always loved. And
wow.
I was only, I was less familiar with it. I had seen it, but, I didn't own a copy of it. And so he told me what the story was, and we just made that the plot,
Absolutely, man.
Well, with the blessing of, Bill Everett had always said we could do something with Amazing Man if we wanted to. That's why we ended up doing that. And then later, when I went to D.C., I actually made up a character called Amazing Man. I knew Stan wouldn't like that name at Marvel, but once I was, doing All-Star Squadron at D.C., I could actually use that name that at Marvel Stan would have said was way too carny,
Very interesting. Well, and if we can, then let's talk a little bit about All-Star Squadron and you coming over to D.C. First of all, the jump to D.C., was it because you weren't getting along with Shooter?
Yeah.
That simple. Okay. And
it's that simple.
Okay. Well, go on.
I just felt I felt he lied to me in some negotiations and so forth, and we could have parted, in a more friendly term. But after what I felt were lies, or at least deliberate misinformation, I really didn't intend to deal with him anymore. And I had a long-standing offer from DC, so I decided to take it. I didn't have any great desire to work for DC, but it did, it would be a kick, I felt, to get to, play around with the Justice Society, which sort of made it worthwhile.
Did they offer that to you, or did you pitch that to them?
No, they sort of wanted me to when I came over. They had a Justice Society series that had ended up in Adventure Comics and only been canceled about a year before,
Yes.
which is why they were amenable to the idea that instead of just bringing back the Justice Society only about a year after it had gone under, they were amenable to my doing this World War II group. I was aware again that probably wouldn't sell as well as a modern day, but by that stage, I got to admit, I had very little interest in comic book sales, except obviously you had to sell enough copies to keep the editors and everybody off your back. And eventually I didn't, but I did for a long time.
Well, because it was such a great series, man. And again, I enjoyed that.
That doesn't necessarily mean they'll sell. There are a lot of good series that don't sell at all.
No, you're right. And it's still happening today. You're 100% right.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed again, because of, I think, reading those reprints, loved that Adventure Comics and All-Star Comics run. I talked to Keith Giffen about that in the past and how much they made Superman look like that classic Joe Shuster look and everything. That was really great. But then, to go back to World War...
Wally Wood had done that back when he was working with Paul Levitz on the book. He had done that one or two issues, too. I think that was one of the first times that was done consciously and everything. And I just like to play around with these things and, kind of ignore the... and again, it was a way of keeping out of DC continuity, too. Once again, I just as soon be off in my own little world as much as possible at DC and not have to interact with the other... writers and editors. I felt, my feeling was I'd worked with what I felt was the best editor in comics at the time, and for quite a few years, Stan Lee, much as I liked Julie Schwartz and other, editors and respected what they did. So I really wasn't that wild about knuckling under to a bunch of guys who I felt, didn't know nearly as much as my last boss or as much as necessarily what he had taught me. So I figured I'll just go and do my own thing, and as long as that worked for me, it did. And when eventually that stopped selling enough books, well, then I had to figure out, another way to make a living,
Sure, absolutely. Now, I know your former wife, Dan, she co-wrote All-Star Squadron.
It's not my former wife. She's my wife now.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Yeah. I beg your pardon.
Yeah, it was my wife, my first wife, Jean, who had written things like Night Nurse and Spidey Super Stories. Yeah, Dan and I worked together, at a little at Marvel. She helped me with a couple of plots, but mostly when I went to D.C., I got her involved and everything. And she worked with me for several years there. And when I went back to Marvel, less so, though we still have a lot of credits at Marvel together based on plotting together.
That's cool. Well, I'm glad you guys are together, too, because I thought, you guys were a great writing team. And I wondered, what would you say, could you quantify what her contributions were to writing All-Star Squadron?
Well, it depended. It depended. In some cases, we plotted them together. And there was sometimes her idea, sometimes mine, or I had a little idea, and she would flesh it out. And sometimes she would bring things, that, I wouldn't have thought of because I'd been engrossed in the comics thing so much. But in some of the books, especially at DC, not at Marvel ever, but at DC, she was often the writer of the first draft of the dialogue, too, especially on books like, I know, quite a few issues of Infinity Incorporated she did the first draft of. And then we did that 4-issue series, Johnny Thunder, a.k.a. Thunderbolt.
Yes.
She did the first draft, and as a matter of fact, that book is pretty close. I mean, it was more like I did some editing of her rather than co-writing it. Really.
I see. Okay. So
it varied. It varied, and on other books like All-Star Squadron and Arak, we sort of co-plotted, and Arak was originally really based on an idea of hers, really not mine.
Oh, interesting. I didn't realize that. Well,
we were talking about doing something. They wanted some kind of Conan type character from me at DC, and I had thought about getting another Howard character, or making up a character like that. And Dan came up with this kind of weird idea about what if an American Indian discovered Europe, and from that came eventually Arak, Son of Thunder.
Oh, really cool, man. Yeah. That's amazing. At first, and now you see the title and you don't know how to pronounce it. But now that you say it, I know exactly what. Because at first I'm like, a lot
of people couldn't pronounce Conan for years. Some people would pronounce it Conan. I'd hear people, say, or
sure.
Red Sanja. I mean, I don't care as long as they buy it. They can pronounce it however they wanted to. I grew up my entire childhood the first time around reading about a character I thought was named the Submariner, because
Sure.
I never heard the word pronounced by anybody, and also thinking that the whole time, I think, since I never saw the movie serial at the time, all the way through his end in 1953, I thought that Captain Marvel's magic word, I pronounced it Shazam. I never said Shazam.
Oh, interesting.
Even though now I see that's a more obvious pronunciation. But I always pronounced it Shazam,
Sure.
for the entire 6 or 7 years that I was, reading that comic the first time through. It didn't matter as long as I put my dime down. They didn't care.
I remember your reboot of Shazam and have to ask what you thought of the trailer that they just dropped this week.
I haven't seen the trailer
Okay.
of the new movie. It looks like they're trying to find ways to bring what they can of the original character back, even though they've had to make some changes.
I think you'll be pleased because they keep a lot of, without spoiling it for you, they keep a lot of the classic tropes, and it feels like Big, the Tom Hanks movie, applied to a superhero story, which is a great idea.
Which is kind of funny because I started doing that back whenever I started handling the character back in stories like Secret Origins, where I think one of the first times that that had been done with the idea that he kept the young mind when he had Captain Marvel's body was maybe when Jerry Bingham and I did the retelling of the first Captain Marvel story in one of the early issues of Secret Origins, and then Dan and I together did a 4-issue series on Shazam: The New Beginning, with a 30th edition of a 30th anniversary edition, which just came out, and we did it there. So I don't know if we had Big in mind particularly, but I don't think you'll find that much in a Captain Marvel story before we did it. But I think that's a good approach at this particular stage to make the character different. Otherwise, if he's a different character, it's more like my version of Captain Marvel at Marvel, where they're two different people. And that may have worked in a certain way back in the 40s. I don't think it would work as well now. But I do know that Mike Uslan, whose dream it's been to get the Shazam series into a movie, I know he's a fan of the original character, so I knew he'd want to do right by it if he could.
I really enjoyed when Rick Jones was tied to Marvel and the way you set things up. I thought that was a great homage, but also a very modern take on two different characters occupying the same space like that. It was pretty neat, and I always enjoyed Rick Jones in the Negative Zone.
Yeah, well, it was just an attempt to kind of save a book that was kind of going nowhere. It was a character Stan hadn't really wanted to do, and I gave him a bad color scheme and everything, so I figured it was my job to try to save it. And I suddenly came up with the idea at home one morning, and I called Stan and told him I got this idea of something to do with Captain Marvel, but I'll only do it if you give the book to me and have me write it, And I guess he could have ordered me, not to, but he said okay, and so I got it. And at that same time, by sheer coincidence, Gil Kane came in and said he'd like to do Captain Marvel, just not knowing what was going on with it. So we yanked the plot back from the artist who had it, gave him something else, and Gil and I worked together for the first time on it, and we really had a good time, and we worked together a lot after that.
And honestly, what a great opportunity for you when you came along that you were able to work with some of these great artists and stuff, and I it's great that you straddle these different generations with the
I'm really happy to do that. I feel I was very lucky to have come along at the time when I could still. I was thinking about this morning, except for maybe on Wonder Woman, I did meet at least one or more of the creators of most of the major characters. Even Bob Kane, I exchanged a couple of sentences with once, and I was probably lucky that was about it. But I got to know Siegel and Schuster and spend a little time with them, and Bill Everett was sort of a roommate off and on for 2 or 3 years, and I got to know Martin Odell and Redun Green and Harry Lampert of the Flash and Gardner Fox and all these guys. It was nice.
Absolutely, man. No, and obviously with Ditko's passing, I should ask you if you've got any good Steve Ditko stories.
Well, none I haven't already told because there weren't that many. It's just he was just an odd character. He had his own way about him, and some days I think what a great figure of integrity, the way he, turned down money, and then sometimes I think, boy, what an idiot for turning down all that money, and everything. But I guess they're probably both true. But he was a great talent.
Absolutely. My God, yes.
And so I know that they're going to kill me, though, if we don't talk a little about the Terrificon. You think we should mention it at all?
Sure.
Or?
No, and, believe me, I'm going to, well, my intent was to cover that in the intro and the outro and everything, so believe me.
Okay.
No, I got Mitch's back. He's got my back as well.
All right. Well, because, they'll have your back with a knife if you don't mention it, I guess. Yeah.
No, I'm really, and like I said, if you want, we can wrap up, Roy. I don't want to hurt you.
No, it's okay. Go ahead. But I just wanted to make sure we didn't forget that because it's coming up. I have to go to Honolulu next weekend.
Sorry.
But then 2 weeks after that is, sorry about that. Well, I'll never get outside the hotel. I've been there before. I'm just going for the 2 days. I'll be inside signing comics the whole time.
Oh, man, I hear you. But yeah, geez.
I'm just going for the money, But no, I like Hawaii. I was there, years ago for for a couple of weeks with Dan and my mother. So, but I won't have time to do much. So I'm just happy. I'll just sign stuff and then hop on a plane and come home. But I enjoyed the Terrificon because it's such an unusual setting. Being in a casino, even though I don't really, gamble. But it's still a nice setting to kind of wander around in. It's different from the usual comic book convention.
I'm absolutely looking forward to it, and I'm moderating a bunch of panels for Mitch.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we're doing two. We're going to do the Marvel Cosmic and also the Wolverine panel that you're going to do with the psychologist that wrote that interesting book about Wolverine.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. I just go wherever they tell me to. Yeah, it's Wolverine. It's kind of funny after having the idea for Wolverine, I never really thought about it much, and then it occurred to me, well, I ought to occasionally mention to people that I co-created the character. I mean, I got nothing but respect for what Len Wein and others, did with it, but the fact remains it was, my idea, so I thought, I may as well mention it occasionally. It is, after all, the most famous character that I ever came up with the idea for.
Yeah, please tell us about your contribution to creating Wolverine.
Yeah, well, it was really because of Canada. I felt like, it just occurred to me, this is near the end of my time as being editor-in-chief, but, I knew we had a lot of Canadian readers, I don't know, 5 or 10% maybe, or several percent at least of our readers were Canadian, not even counting the Canadians living in the United States or somewhere that might buy one. And we didn't have a single Canadian, character. And I thought, I didn't even know if there were any anywhere in comics, and I thought, we ought to have one. So I started thinking, I thought, well, an animal title. I didn't want a Captain Canuck, kind of title.
Sure.
So I decided that an animal would be good. We always had animals and things like this, and I thought, you can't have a moose. There's already one in Archie, and that's too dramatic. And I came up with, as it turned out, Dave Cockerman showed me a character he'd made up called Wolverine later, and I think he brought some elements into it later when he was drawing it, but they didn't have anything to do with the character. What it is I started thinking of animals, and I came up with two. And obviously, if Dave had been the influence, I wouldn't have had two. One was Wolverine, and the other was a badger, and because both are very fierce creatures.
Sure.
And the Wolverine, in particular, of course, is a small creature noted for taking on animals, much bigger than itself. Sort of the equivalent of the Tasmanian devil. If I'd been doing a character foreign, I might have made up a Tasmanian devil.
Sure.
But so I came up with the name. Once I decided, I called in Len, who was writing the Hulk. It seemed like a good place to introduce it, and I asked him, but of course he didn't, have a lot of choice in the matter, nor did he have any objections, that I would like him right away to introduce in some story, and I think he was just about to take the character up north, or maybe he did it for that reason. I'm not sure exactly, but anyway, I said I wanted this Canadian character. He's called Wolverine, and one of the main things is, besides being fierce, bad-tempered, like a Wolverine, I said I wanted him to be short, because all these heroes are always, they're always 6 foot something,
Sure.
And I felt Wolverine, I got no objection to Hugh Jackman playing him and everything like this, but in the comic book, I said I wanted him to be short, Now Len went off and kind of rediscovered the wheel, I guess, and forgot that I had told him this, but I told him, I said if he or artist Herb Trippy or somebody had brought in a tall Wolverine, they'd have been back to the drawing board. I said he's short and he's mean. And after that point, except for maybe looking over John Romita's shoulder a tiny bit, Len did more of that while I was, while the character was being developed. After that point, I sort of left it all to Len and John Romita and Herb. I had done my part. It was sort of the, equivalent of a one-night stand, I guess. I go in, have my fun, and then I get out and leave somebody else do all the work. And of course, so all the the development work, that was all done by Ramita designing the costume, and then Herb is the artist, and then Dave Cockrum came in and did other things with it, maybe making it look more like his character, especially when he took the mask off, and things of this sort. But I felt, well, I'd done the job that I was hired for, which was to make up the idea for a good character, turn it over to a talented writer and a talented artist, and, then stand aside and watch them do their stuff. They came up either, Len or Claremont with all the other stuff, like the adamantium claws. That was all them. Of course, I'd made up adamantium, but they were the ones that gave Wolverine adamantium claws.
Sure.
And then of course, when we decided to do the X-Men as an international group, of course, the Wolverine was a logical, member, for that as well.
Understood. No, and it reminds me of the creation of Barry Allen, and that he has many fathers as well,
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, no.
Yeah, I was always wondering when they were going to do a Green Lantern movie. I said, well, who are they going to credit on the Green Lantern movie? Are they going to credit Martin O'Dell and Bill Finger, who created the original, or are they just going to credit, say, Julie Schwartz, who should be in there too, John Broome and Gil Kane, who did the 60s. They solved that problem by not crediting anybody.
Yeah, I know. I was going to ask, and I guess not. You're right about that. Yeah, that they didn't. I was.
They left the credits out entirely, which was unfair to all concerned.
Agreed. And one of my
the only thing worse is Wonder Woman, a really good movie. But the co-creator, as far as I'm concerned, an original artist of Wonder Woman, is not even mentioned in that movie. They've got credits at the end for. Ross Andrew, Bob Kanigher, George Perez, 10 other people who have done Wonder Woman over the years, and of course Marston at the beginning. But there's no mention in the entire movie of H.G. Peter, who at least designed or co-designed the costume and drew the character from 1941 to 1958, almost every single story, except for 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And they totally screwed his memory because he doesn't have a legal representing force, I guess.
Yeah, isn't that the way? And that's a shame. And that's funny. I was just talking to Denny O'Neil the other day, and he was pointing out the benefits of having, and I forget the guy's name, Howard Chaykin's lawyer. And everyone luckily is, getting a check because they've all kind of allied themselves with Howard Chaykin's lawyer and are getting what they deserve in terms of their contributions.
Yeah, I don't get involved with lawyers. Whenever Marvel came to me about the deal, I had a couple of offers not from Chaykin himself, because we weren't in close contact, but somebody else offered to have a lawyer, might be the same guy, and so forth. Maybe I should have done it. Maybe I'd get a better deal, but I just didn't want to get involved with lawyers. So I accepted the deal they gave me. Maybe I won't get rich from it, but I'm happy with it.
Okay, you're content with it. That's the important thing.
Yeah. Well, if I'd like them to even give me more money.
Well, sure.
But I'm doing all right.
Well, that's cool. I should mention Alter Ego because, God, thank you for doing that book, because I think pre-1980s, as much as the 20th century has been documented, that's where the whole start is really when you start in even the 70s. They didn't film everything. They didn't videotape everything, certainly. And I'm really glad that you have been doing these great interviews with, Golden Age creators that have kind of slipped through the cracks. And I love it. And do you record those? Do you tape record those as well?
Well, I don't do many interviews myself. At the beginning of the thing, I did a handful of them. But I didn't. I felt like it's not my thing exactly, although I could do it, and B, I was lucky to run into other people that could do it better. Particularly in the early days, Jim Amish did this wonderful series of interviews for about 100 issues, and now Richard Arndt has taken over, and he's done some really fine ones. And there's other people in between that do individual things. So they do the recording. Of course, there are almost no Golden Age people around to be interviewed now anymore.
Yeah.
But at least we got a lot of them down on tape, while we could. And now I find I'm interviewing widows or children, but of some of those people, or having articles that that study those people and do research on them. But it's you get the first person accounts while you can, and then after that you get the other people that remember the person, or you go by records or whatever. And at least that first 100 issues or so, I was able to get a lot of the Golden Age people, and of course a lot of Silver Age people are gone too.
Yeah. Would you consider ever releasing the tapes? Because that's one of my favorite things on John Cook's Will Eisner documentary that he put together. Those shop talk interviews that Eisner did, that he collected in a trade paperback. But it was so great to hear him one-on-one with Kniff and Kirby and
well, the interviews are all the interviews mostly aren't my property, except for the handful I did myself with guys like Ramita and Erwin Hayes and a couple of them in the early days. They're the property of the people like Jim and Richard and others who do them. So anybody who wanted to approach them for the tapes, they would have them. You know, they may have made copies, you know, for a transcriber if they didn't transcribe them themselves, but they would have the tapes, and they are perfectly, you know, legally capable of, you know, of giving those tapes or selling those tapes or, you know, doing anything they want with them, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, that's why I was hoping you might, with your conversations, put out an audio product of some sort, and especially, you know, in this digital age, it'd be great to have an MP3 download that you might sell of these great conversations, because you know, your insight.
I'm kind of a print person, you know. I'm kind of a print person, and I haven't. I don't know. I'm 77. I haven't got the ambition to suddenly be working a lot with a lot of tapes, or well, you know, now would be. I mean, listen, you know, I'm just now getting into, you know, DVDs and CDs, and I'll be lucky to be able to buy the next PC and have a CD player in it. You know, I mean, I just wish they wouldn't invent anything for a couple of years. Give us a chance to catch up. You know,
I do understand.
You just get used to something, and and suddenly it's obsolete. I mean, you know, it goes the way. You know, a few ideas deserve to go away, like 8-track tapes, you know, which were never any damn good anyway.
I remember 8-track tapes, absolutely.
I mean, God, I used to play those in the car, and
yes.
I remember trying to play Chorus Line, and half the songs were interrupted in the middle where the track turned over. But, you know, but the other thing, CDs and DVDs, those are wonderful things, and now everybody wants this stupid streaming, and
yes.
That's fine, but, you know, but why not be able to have an actual, you know, copy of something yourself and everything? I prefer that, and, you know, I'll be lucky to be able to keep getting them. So I don't really want to get involved with making a lot of, you know, I think it's great that John Cook and these other people do that, but I'm not that interested in doing that myself. If Jim Amish and these other people wanted to make something out of their tapes or whatever, that would be just wonderful. Or if somebody else put them together, well, you know, they could do it. They don't need alter ego for that. The only thing we retain is the right to reprint the article or interview one time. And that's it. You know, other than that, it belongs totally to the interviewer.
That's cool, and that's great. And obviously, as a creator, that's great that you're thinking along those lines. So, do you shape the editorial? Like, you know, okay, this is going to be the subject this month. What is your, beyond the articles that you write and the editorial at the front and stuff? What do you do for Alter Ego?
Well, I totally decide what's going to be in it, but of course, I'm at the mercy of, you know, of what somebody else does.
Sure, what's coming in.
Sometimes the idea is mine to do, you know, and I suggest to an interviewer that he interview this person or that person, or I solicit, how about you writing this article, or, you know, talk somebody into writing an article or whatever. But a lot of times the interviewer, Jim Amish before and Richard Arndt and others now, they bring me the idea and say, you know, how about I interview this person or that person? Like one issue, it'll be something that was, you know, my idea. And sometimes another. For example, the issue that will be coming out in a few months that I just put to bed has a long interview with the widow of Norman Maurer, if you know who that is.
I do know Norman Maurer. Explain. Yes, please.
Yeah, Norman Maurer was what he's known in part for being the partner at St. John in the era of the 3D comics of Joe Kubert. He did all these wonderful Three Stooges comics, partly because he was the son-in-law of Mo Howard, the leader of the Three Stooges. And so we're interviewing Mo's daughter, Joan, who was Norman's wife, and we got an interview that deals with the Stooges and their comics and Norman and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, that's really good. In this case, I knew Joan slightly. I got to meet Norman a couple of years before he passed away. He came to a party at my place even, and I was just really pleased I got to know him, a great talent. And I'd always wanted to do an interview, you know, with Joan. So we got that together. But I had, you know, Richard, you know, do it, and he did a wonderful job. And another time, Richard will have he'll have an idea of somebody he wants to interview, and that's what Jim Amish, when he was doing all these, he would every month. He would come like, you know, how about I interview this guy and that guy? And I'd say, okay, go do it and send it in when it's done. You know, then I'd make an issue out of it. You know, I just put together the issues from whatever is available. But of course, now I have to sort of figure it out a year or two ahead of time, so I always know what's coming up.
That's excellent. And
I've got way more stuff on the shelf that I'd be able to use in several years, and it makes me feel guilty because there's some stuff I've had and I can't seem to find the right place, to put it in,
I understand.
Because
Yeah.
if something isn't quite a cover feature, then I have to figure out, well, where can I, what issue can I fit it in where it'll have enough space, but it won't have to be the cover,
I understand, and they're amazing surprises every time Alter Ego comes out. I love comic book history, and mentioning Norman Mauer, I have to let you know, when I was in high school, I interviewed Norman Mauer because I had read Moe's book, and also I think Three Stooges scrapbook might have come out then as well that Joan had a part in. And I had no idea while I was interviewing Norman. I mostly focused on the Stooges, and Norman also was the producer of a lot of their '60s films as well. And
all of them, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually. And
there's about 3 or 4 or 5 of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really where they made, thankfully, the bulk of their money, because I know Columbia.
Right. The best stuff was the shorts, but the fact remains, at least the ones who survived, the 2 brothers or one of the brothers, and and Larry Fine were able to make a little more money maybe in their later years, because I think they got kind of screwed on those short
Absolutely.
subjects.
Oh, yeah. And I before he passed away, had a conversation with Joe Kubert about Norman, and I'm kicking myself that I didn't get the chance to interview Joe about Norman, because, I think I'm glad you're doing this.
Yeah, they were good friends from first to last for like 50, 60 years, more like the 30 or 40 years that, Norman was alive.
I hear you. Well, and also the contribution that Norman made to comics, like you say, with St. John's and those 3D comics, were really this interesting chapter. And he was he was a good artist as well. I mean, that's why I'm kicking myself.
He did wonderful work for the Lev Gleason people on Daredevil and Crime Buster back in those days.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So forth. It's funny, those comics aren't collected much now, and they don't seem to have much respect, along with the Crime Does Not Pay that was the biggest seller.
Yes.
But, in terms of writing and drawing, the Lev Gleason, Crime Buster, and Daredevil stuff in Daredevil and Boy Comics was some of the best stuff that was on the market at the time, and some of the best sellers.
I wonder if that stuff is tied in some sort of ownership litigation.
No.
Oh, it's not?
It's just because they're not, the straight superhero type as much. I mean, Daredevil got overshadowed by that kid gang, the little wise guys.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
And Crime Buster sort of, I don't know, that for a while they called him CB, and they sort of got rid of the superhero look to him and so forth. And they had a more realistic, Crime Does Not Pay kind of story in there than they had in Superman or Captain Marvel or Captain America.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, it's probably more modern in a lot of ways, more modern in its sensibility than a lot of the comics from that period. More maturely done, but doesn't get much respect nowadays.
Yeah, I don't understand that, and I agree with you. And it seemed like Crime Buster became more of a straight-laced Archie in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you, and also
he ended up reverting back to his real name of Chuck Chandler and just going to college and having varsity adventures. By that time, I knew he was about dead, and pretty soon he was gone. And of course, Daredevil had one of the great costumes. The original Daredevil had one of the great costumes of all time.
Well, and I appreciated in your alter ego stories, when you used your hero alter ego, that you brought back the Claw, his great nemesis and everything. Daredevil's.
Yeah. And of course, I swiped the costume for 3D Man at Marvel, or just made it red and green instead of red and blue.
I did
swipe there. I think I even named him Chuck Chandler.
I didn't even realize that 3D Man was a swipe from Daredevil. That's fantastic. Again, because the original Daredevil, that costume had a great look, and I know. Pete Morrissey, obviously, I think swiped a lot for Thunderbolt. Pete admitted that he based it on Daredevil and so forth, and I based 3D Man on it. And before that, I had made up a character called Gemini, who was a member of the Zodiac group that grew out of the Steranko stuff, and I gave him that same costume before, but there it was black and white. Oh, I didn't realize that. That's fantastic.
Never swipe something once if you could swipe it twice. That's my amendment of Wally Wood's old thing about never draw anything you can trace.
That's fantastic. Jeez. Well, I wanted to get back real fast to All-Star Squadron and just ask that core group of Tarantula, Liberty Bell, Johnny Quick. Why those characters? What made you like those? And Robot Man obviously is another one of those guys.
Well, mostly because they were the ones that had not so much Liberty Bell. I needed a woman in the group, and there weren't that many female, heroes at that time.
Yes.
But with Robot Man, Johnny Quick, Shining Knight and his horse, later Tarantula with the webbing, anyway.
Yes.
I wanted them in there because they were the characters that had superpowers. You know, I mean, otherwise, a lot of the other DC characters outside the Justice Society, as some of them inside, were characters that they were just guys in masks. And that's okay, but you know, you can't. I didn't want a League of Batmen.
Understood.
You know, I mean, if you get Green Arrow with his arrows, he's okay. You know, but you get this guy and that guy. Next thing you know, there'd be a bunch of people, but they wouldn't really have any special powers. And you know, I wanted to, you know, and of course in the Justice Society, at least you had Hawkman flying, you had Green Lantern and the Flash and Wonder Woman. The Atom got super strength at least after a while, and so forth. But you know, so I wanted to use the characters that had the superpowers, you know, Johnny Quick's speed and, you know, Robot Man's power and all that.
I loved your...
So that was the reason why I used those particular characters.
I understand. I loved your bookend origin of the Justice Society and then the last days of the Justice Society. I thought those were incredible stories. And really...
Well, I hated doing that because that was what they wanted at the time, was to get rid of them. You know, they said they were never going to use them again, you know.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking, believe me.
But of course they lied, you know. They always use them again.
I understand.
And I knew they would use them again. It's not like I ever believed them. It's, you know, it's like Sam Spade said, we didn't believe you. We believed your $200, you know.
Well, but you gave them a back door to come back through and everything, putting them in Ragnarok and, you know, leaving the possibility.
Well, I knew they'd bring him back anyway, whatever they told me. You know, Dick Giordano, I mean, I don't say he was lying, but Dick Giordano told me, as long as I'm editor here, they'll never be brought back. Well, maybe they were gone by the time maybe he was gone by the time they came back. But, you know, it was only a couple of years before they came back again. I knew that. I mean, by that time I knew after having been through the Crisis stuff and been misled about that, I knew DC and what it would do and how it would, you know, go back and rethink anything it told me and disown it if it was convenient to them. I knew them well enough by that time to know that was going to happen. So I just figured, well, if they want me to kill these characters off, I'll kill them off. But I know they'll be back, you know.
Well, and I appreciated probably the frustration you were going through, because I don't know how All-Star Squadron was selling at the time of Crisis, but to take away the parallel worlds and the history out from under you, and that you had to obviously respond back with the Young All-Stars to kind of come up with, you know, different heroes that could replace the Trinity. And, you know, what, you know, so, tell me, you know, when you say that they misled you about Crisis, what did they, if you don't mind, I'm curious what they told you.
No. I mean, I've said it everywhere else. I mean, you know, I was told, you know, it's the funny thing is I can't remember which of them told me. It might have been Dick Giordano, but I don't want to put all the blame off on him because he was in conference with, you know, with Jeanette and so forth. But I was told sort of that, you know, that they wouldn't even do Crisis if I objected because it was going to ruin my characters. And, you know, Jesus, I knew that wasn't true. If they thought of this idea, they're going to do it. You know, and I could either say stop Steamroller, or I can get on the Steamroller and ride it somewhere. So I decided to just get on because they were going to do it anywhere. But I tried to steer it by saying all I really want is at the end of the thing that there's some like pocket universe, you know, like another, you know, where it exists. And they told me, oh yeah, you can do that. And then later they decided that truth was no longer operative, as they used to say back during the Nixon days. And you know, but they had told me, oh, you know, I'd be able to use Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman and those in the thing and so forth. And then I found out, I think from Marv Wolfman, when I ran into him in England, not from anybody at D.C. who would have the decency to tell me, that truth was no longer operative, and I wouldn't be able to do it. So when I got back, they decided they needed to kill the book. It was not selling great. We'd never adequately replaced the art by Buckler and Ordway totally, but and maybe there were other things I did wrong, but. We were jumping around from artists. It was doing all right. It could have survived easily. But the thing is, at that particular time, it got derailed. And since it wasn't the top seller, they didn't have to worry about saving it. It was just simpler. And they tried to make it look as if they were doing me a favor by making it start over with a new number 1, which was going to be still called All-Star Squadron, like Volume 2. But it was going to have a bunch of different characters and downplay, you know, the JSA characters. And so, working on this, my wife came up with the name Young All-Stars. I don't know if there was ever another group of heroes, you know, with the word young in front of it. Now it seems like there are about 57 of them. But, you know, Young Avengers, Young this, Young that, Young Justice. But I don't know if there was that much before Young All-Stars, but that was her idea for a title, and I figured, well, that made more sense, and I liked it better because it wasn't really the All-Star Squadron. You know, it was like a subset of the All-Star Squadron, and maybe a little like Jerry Conway when he did the All-Star Squad,
Yes, the Super
as part
Squad.
of JSA.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, the Super Squad stuff. And so I did the best I could, and I had fun with it. And I guess the two series together had like 100-issue run, which isn't bad.
Like I said, man, I read every one. And Iron Monroe, I thought, was a very interesting character that I don't know if was it the intent to have him kind of be a mystery sort of Superman character? I know about his origins in, I want to say, the Gladiator a short story, correct? Or a novel.
Yes. Yeah. Well, he was the son of that character.
Yeah. And I mean, it just seemed like he had a mysterious background, it seemed, while while he was in your hands. And,
I just felt that since I felt that Gladiator had influenced Superman, I figured that if I'm going to have to replace Superman, let's replace it with somebody who's the son of the character from Gladiator.
That's simple. Okay. Because, I like how the story progressed in other people's hands as well. I think Mark Andreyko in one of his books, I think he continued Iron Monroe's story as an older man.
Well, those are all clones. I don't count any of that stuff.
Is that true? When other people work on your creations, you'd say?
Yeah, that's true. The one and I mean, not that I have great respect for him,
sure.
but the one and only conversation I ever had in my life with Neil Gaiman was when he called me to tell me that he was killing off Fury in Sandman, and did I mind? And I told him no, because it's just a clone. She's really alive, and the minute if I ever came back in and took DC, she'd be back 3 minutes later. I said, it's all just, it's just all words on paper, as you know as well as I do. We've never spoken since, Neil and I, so I guess he accepted that. I don't know.
Now, as an original, and forgive me, because obviously there were fans that came before you as well, but your activity in the fan journalism world is well known to us that pay attention to stuff like that. I mean, do you ever step back and look at like the stuff that us podcasters are doing and the websites now that have the news? What do you think of where the fanzines have evolved?
Yeah, this is like the modern day successors.
Sure.
The internet and everything. They're all the modern day successors to the fanzines we did with with a much better technology.
Fair enough. That's true. Absolutely.
And if I were growing up and knew my way around a computer, maybe if I was younger and maybe I'd be doing something like this. But as is, all I can do is put out this little magazine, and an occasional comic book story or whatever.
Do you still have a couple comic stories you want to do?
Oh yeah, well, of course, what I'd really like to do is write All-Star Squadron again or Conan. More than anything.
Oh, that'd be great.
And I wouldn't mind making up some new characters, or I've got a couple of them. I can't find the time to work on them, so I probably should get back to that in a second. I keep my hand in. I work on the Spider-Man newspaper strip with Stan and have for like the past 18 years.
Yeah, forgive me, I think I might have a couple strips that have Stan's name on it, but likely were from your time with.
Well, if it came after about 1999, 2000.
Okay, then I do.
And everything.
I bought them from Alex.
But Stan was rewriting, was editing those and so forth, and everything. Sometimes lightly, sometimes more heavily, and and once in a while, I do a lot of introductions. I just did a 11,000 word introduction to a reprinting that the first omnibus Conan volume that Marvel's going to do.
Oh, that's great!
Come out at the end of the year. They asked me for 4,000 words, so I gave them 11,000 and said, "I'll cut it down if you want." And they said, "No, we'll take it."
That's great. Oh, I'm so glad.
We'll pay you for the 4,000 and take the 11,000. That's fine with me.
I said,
it's just.
No, go on.
I'm glad Marvel's got Conan back because Dark Horse is a fine company, but I didn't like they had recoloring and they put everything out just in paperback, and I wanted to see it collected in hardcovers and so forth. So I'm very happy that Marvel is doing it, and this guy Corey Suttlemeyer that does the reprint books is really has really got a great plan for reprinting all that stuff.
Understood, and what a great run. And good Lord. I mean, you and Barry Windsor Smith and the others that worked with you as well. I mean, Jesus, man, especially
obviously I'd like to write Conan again now that they've got it back and they claim they're going to do 3 books about him. I'd love to be able to do one of them. And I've had conversations with them about that, but that's up to them. My feeling is, I'd like to do it, but my feeling is basically, if in order to secure my little tiny reputation, my little tiny corner in comics history, I have to write one more damn comic book, then I'm already a failure. You know, if what I've done already isn't enough, I'm not going to salvage anything by doing a handful more.
Yeah, I would think the 10,000 plus stories that you've likely done. You know,
I don't know if it's that many, but it's enough.
I don't know, man, because I remember when we were saying that about Stan in the 90s and 2000s, and geez, Roy, I mean, you've been doing it for 40 plus years or whatever. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, although not so much. Last 10 or 15 years, I haven't been writing many comic books.
Fair enough.
More alter ego and the strip and everything. Anyway, I better get going,
Yes.
I guess. But I guess I'll see you at the Terrificon there in. What is the date of that again?
August 17th, I believe. And yes, I'm looking forward to our conversations.
Yeah,
there.
yeah, it'll be my third year there in a row. I had a lot of fun. Last year, I think the Iron Fist actors were there.
Oh, that's great. Did you have a chance?
And everything.
Yeah.
So I've enjoyed that convention. Mitch puts on a good show with a lot of guests.
Absolutely.
I've been going to a couple of comic conventions recently where it seems like the main guests were wrestlers, and well, that's nice. It doesn't have any interest for me, so I'll be glad to see showbiz and comic book people again, I guess.
Oh no, and Terrificon is a very pure comic book show. All people have to do is go to the website to check it out. You've been
That's one of the things I like. They have a few other guests, but it's a real comic book show, like the Charlotte Heroes Convention and things like that. Those are the comic conventions I like the best.
Me too, man. Listen, you've been generous with your time. I hope you.
Okay, well, thanks.
I hope you'll come back and we can talk more because your body of work. I knew we couldn't cover it in a half hour, and certainly not even in an hour. So I hope you had fun, and I hope you'll be willing to come back sometime.
Oh, yeah, we'll come back. I'll talk about my Millie the Model work
It'd be my pleasure to hear you talk about Millie the Model. But thank you for your time, Roy.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks again for listening to Word Balloon. Thank you very much for your continued support, and I really appreciate everybody, enjoying the show because I've been getting a lot of positive emails and social media messages as well, how much they're really happy. And I got to tell you, man, it's all thanks to the great creators and creative people that come on Word Balloon and give me these incredible conversations. So can't thank the guests enough. They're the ones who really make the show. I'm just here directing traffic. So both literally and figuratively, if you know my radio career. Until next time, Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2018.